Everyone froze. Forks hovered midair. At a high-end steakhouse in Dallas, a 10-year-old boy in leg braces reached out, not to his father, but to Tanisha, the only black waitress on staff. What happened next shattered the silence and changed 3 lives forever. A billionaire, a boy who couldn't walk, and a woman with a secret far bigger than her apron. You won't believe how it ends. This story of injustice and eventual redemption deserves to be shared. So, hit that like button and subscribe to follow more true stories of courage in the face of discrimination. Now, let's rewind to see how this explosive situation began. It started on a Friday evening at the Longhorn Reserve, one of the most exclusive restaurants in downtown Dallas. Leather booths, live piano, and price tags that scared away all but the wealthiest Texans. That night, Preston Carter, CEO of Carter Holdings and one of the richest men in the South, finally decided to take his 10-year-old son Ethan out for dinner. It had been 2 years since the accident, a horrific car crash that left Ethan with partial paralysis in both legs. Since then, the boy had barely smiled, barely spoken, and had never set foot in a public place like this. Dinner had been going quietly, too quietly, until the pianist started a soft rendition of "What a Wonderful World." That's when it happened. Ethan, with trembling hands and clunky leg braces, slid off his seat and took a shaky step forward. The room stilled. You could have heard a fork drop. And then, he reached out his hand. Not to his father, not to another child, but to Tanisha, the only black waitress on staff that night. Every eye in the restaurant snapped toward the small boy. A few mouths fell open. Some held their breath. No one moved, not even Tanisha. She stared at Ethan's outstretched hand. And for a moment, it looked like she might ignore him. After all, she'd been trained to stay professional, to not disturb the ambiance, especially with VIP clients like Preston Carter in the room. Then came the voice of authority. "Sir, control your son," the manager snapped, striding over. "This isn't a dance hall, and our staff are not here to entertain guests." Preston froze, torn between shame, pride, and fear of embarrassment. But before he could say a word, Tanisha calmly untied her apron and placed it on her tray. "I can't dance in an apron," she said softly. And just like that, without fanfare, without asking permission, Tanisha stepped forward, took Ethan's trembling hand, and let him lead. One small step, one quiet act of defiance. But in that moment, something unspoken shifted, and the entire room watched. As Tanisha stepped onto the polished marble floor, holding Ethan's tiny hand, the atmosphere in the restaurant shifted from stunned silence to a kind of reverent disbelief. The sound of his metal braces scraping the tile was louder than the piano. But Tanisha didn't flinch. She matched her pace to his. She let him lead. And Preston Carter, used to commanding boardrooms, not dance floors, watched, frozen. This was not part of his plan. You see, Preston wasn't a cruel man. He was a man of control, power, order. When Ethan's accident happened, Preston reacted the only way he knew how. He threw money at the problem. Hired specialists, therapists, trainers, all top-rated, all clinical, all ineffective. But this one dance, was the first time in 2 years he saw his son take initiative. The first time Ethan wasn't being pushed in a chair or helped up the stairs. He wasn't being handled, he was being heard. And it wasn't by a doctor or a therapist. It was by Tanisha, a waitress, a stranger, a black woman whom Preston had barely noticed until that moment. As they danced, if you could even call it dancing, Ethan's face lit up. A spark returned, and in that light, Preston saw something that stopped him cold. He saw his late wife, Maria. She used to dance with Ethan in their living room when he could still run. "It's not about perfection," she used to whisper. "It's about connection." And suddenly, it all clicked. That night wasn't about broken rules or reputation. It was about something Preston hadn't allowed himself to feel in years: hope. But who was Tanisha? A few whispers began to spread. "She's going to get fired. Who does she think she is?" But Preston said nothing. He just stared at her, studying her face, like seeing it for the first time. There was something more behind her calm expression. A presence, a purpose. When the dance ended, Tanisha gently walked Ethan back to his table and said, Thank you for asking me out. It was an honor. Then she turned to leave. Preston stood abruptly. Wait, he said, surprising even himself. What's your full name? Tanisha Evans, sir. He nodded, memorizing it, then reached into his blazer. My office. Tomorrow. 10 a.m. The entire restaurant held its breath. Who was she? And what made her different? What Preston would discover the next day would change everything. If you're still with me, drop a number 1 in the comments. I want to know who's walking through this story with me. And don't go anywhere. The next part reveals a secret Tanisha's been hiding all along. The next morning, Tanisha stood in front of the shimmering glass doors of Carter Tower, a 60-story symbol of power in downtown Dallas. She wasn't wearing a server's apron today. Instead, she wore her best outfit, a navy blue skirt and a white blouse she'd bought on clearance months ago. Her purse was worn, her shoes had scuffs, but her back was straight. Her breath steady, not nervous, determined. Inside the tower, everything was marble, chrome, and cold lighting. The receptionist gave her a quick once-over before picking up the phone. Tanisha Evans to see Mr. Carter. 18th floor, came the reply. Ms. Langley will meet you. As she rode the elevator up, she didn't think about the power dynamic. She thought about Ethan's hand in hers. How firmly he held on. How hard he tried to take each step without needing help. She remembered the look on Preston Carter's face when he asked her name. It wasn't entitlement, it was something else. Recognition, maybe, curiosity, or guilt? The assistant, Ms. Langley, was tall and rigid, mid-40s. Sharp suit, sharper gaze. He had you fired, didn't he? She asked in the hallway. Without even looking back, Tanisha raised an eyebrow. Not yet. Langley smirked. Happens all the time. Powerful clients make a fuss. And girls like you end up jobless. Girls like me? You know what I mean. Tanisha smiled. Yes, I do. That's why I brought my own story. They entered Preston Carter's office, massive windows. Sweeping views of the Dallas skyline. He was standing with his back turned. Arms crossed behind him like a general surveying his empire. Ms. Evans, he said without turning around. Thank you for coming. He gestured toward a chair. She sat, calm and collected. I did some digging, he said, opening a sleek folder on his desk. I needed to understand who the woman was that danced with my son. Inside were printed photos, articles, foundation filings. Freedom Beats, he said, a community movement center for children with mobility challenges. You co-founded it. Tanisha nodded. 6 years ago, with my sister. And yet, you're working tables. I work 3 jobs, she replied. Weeknights at the restaurant, weekends at a bookstore, and I tutor children when I can. Freedom Beats is out of funding. Rent's past due, but I never stopped showing up for the kids. Preston looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time. Why didn't you mention any of this last night? Because I wasn't there for you, Mr. Carter. I was there for Ethan. The room fell silent, and just like that, the illusion shattered. Tanisha wasn't some accidental miracle. She was trained, passionate, brilliant. She had a background in child development, an unfinished master's in special education, paused because of family hardship, and a lifetime of hands-on work most therapists only read about in textbooks. The waitress was never just a waitress. And Preston Carter finally knew it. Preston Carter closed the folder slowly, as if the weight of what he had just learned took a moment to settle in. Tanisha Evans wasn't just remarkable, she was exactly what Ethan needed. Not another expert in a lab coat, not another consultant with a 6-figure fee, but someone who actually saw his son for who he was. Not a patient, not a project, a person. I want you to work for me, Preston said. Tanisha didn't blink. As a waitress in your home? Preston's expression tightened. No, as a therapeutic companion for Ethan. You'd have full access to our facilities. Anything you need, 5 times your current income. Health benefits, support staff. Silence. Then Tanisha leaned forward, just slightly. That's a generous offer, she said, voice calm. But no. Preston blinked, unsure if he'd heard correctly. No, I don't work for people who see my skin before they see my skills, she replied, or who try to buy solutions for problems that need heart, not hardware. He stood up, pacing now. You're turning down an offer that could solve all your financial problems? Out of pride? He pressed. Out of dignity, she corrected gently, and because your son deserves more than someone paid to pretend they care. The room fell completely still. For the first time in years, Preston Carter, the man who built empires with handshakes, had nothing to say. Tanisha stood. Ethan doesn't need more supervision. He needs space to fail, to try, to lead. You don't know him, Preston challenged. I don't need to, she answered. I know what it feels like to be underestimated, to be defined by your limitations, to have people talk over you like you aren't even in the room. She pulled a small business card from her purse and placed it on his desk. Freedom Beats. Classes are Tuesdays and Thursdays. 4 p.m. the first one's on the house. If you're serious about helping your son, let him come, and let him lead. Preston looked down at the card. Simple design, worn edges, but powerful. As Tanisha turned to leave, she passed Ms. Langley again in the hallway. The assistant raised an eyebrow. You turned him down? Tanisha smiled. He offered me a position. And you said no? Langley whispered, stunned. Are you crazy? Maybe, Tanisha said with a soft laugh. But I'd rather be crazy than be owned. That night, in her small apartment on the east side of Dallas, Tanisha returned to the notebook under her bed, filled with sketches, notes, and dreams. She'd been building this vision for years. She just hadn't expected her biggest opportunity to begin with a boy and a dance. She lit a candle, took a deep breath, and whispered, let's see if he shows up. The following Wednesday, just before 4 p.m., Tanisha was tidying the front desk at Freedom Beats, an old, converted warehouse in East Dallas, patched together with murals, posters, and handmade banners that read things like, your rhythm, your rules, and every move counts. She didn't expect him to come. Not really. Her sister, Nia, peeked in from the hallway, tugging nervously at her colorful headscarf. There's a Bentley outside, she whispered, with him in it. Tanisha didn't react, just kept stacking registration forms. He won't come in, Nia added. Men like that don't step into places like this. But Tanisha smiled softly to herself. Don't underestimate the power of a determined child. Through the cracked window, they watched Ethan in the backseat, nervously adjusting one of his braces. The driver's door opened first. Preston stepped out, awkwardly dressed in khakis and a crewneck sweater that didn't quite hide his usual boardroom energy. He looked around, unsure of his surroundings. Then, to Nia's shock, Ethan opened his door and climbed out too. You really think he's ready for this? Nia asked. I think he's already been ready. He just needed permission to try. Inside the center, the air was filled with light music, tapping soles, wheelchair wheels turning on smooth floors. Children moved freely, some danced, some rolled, some just swayed to their own beat. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't even synchronized, but it was alive. Preston walked in slowly, taking it all in. No polished chrome, no white coats, just kids being kids. This looks chaotic, he murmured under his breath. It has structure, Tanisha replied, appearing beside him, just not the kind you're used to recognizing. She turned to Ethan. You want to jump in? The boy looked up at his father, hesitant, unsure. Preston clenched his jaw, then nodded. Go on, I'll be right here. As Ethan joined a small group of kids, Nia offered Preston a folding chair. The first day's always the hardest, she said kindly, for the parents, not the kids. He sat, and for once, said nothing. That's when the front door opened again, and in walked a tall woman with silver braids, a cane, and the presence of a retired general. Preston's eyes widened. Dr. Elaine Mercer? She smiled politely. Nice to see you again. Mr. Carter, you oversee this? I co-lead the research here, she said. We're studying the neurological effects of movement autonomy in children with motor delays. Preston blinked. I thought this was just a community dance class. It is, Tanisha added, joining them, but it's also a pilot study in child-led rehabilitation, blending neuroscience with real-life motion. Preston's gaze shifted back to Ethan, now trying to mimic a spin another child had shown him. He looked awkward, off balance, but he was trying, and for the first time in years, Preston Carter didn't see a patient. He saw his son. The room felt warm, buzzing with energy. Some kids were dancing. Others were just exploring, testing how far they could move, how long they could balance, or how confidently they could spin without help. And then, everything stopped. The music faded, almost like someone had turned the volume down on life itself. All eyes shifted to the center of the room, where Ethan stood. Completely still. One of his braces was lying beside him on the floor. He had taken it off. Preston shot up from his chair. "Ethan, wait," he called out. His voice edged with panic. But Tanisha gently placed a hand on his arm. "Wait," she whispered. "Let him try." In the middle of the room, surrounded by kids with walkers, wheelchairs, prosthetics, and full hearts, Ethan was standing on one leg brace. The other leg wobbled with effort. His face was pale, eyes focused. He took a breath. Then, he stepped forward. Just one step. It wasn't clean. It wasn't smooth. His leg dragged just a bit. His body leaned awkwardly. But it was real. It was his. For the first time in years. He moved without being held. The room erupted into spontaneous cheers, kids clapping, some squealing in joy. One girl with a walker shouted, "Go Ethan!" Cameras flashed. Several reporters, invited earlier by Dr. Mercer and Nia to document the program's first study results, stood frozen, shocked by what they had just seen. But Preston Carter wasn't looking at the press. He was looking at his son. The boy who once avoided mirrors was now standing tall, sweaty and shaky, but glowing with something Preston hadn't seen in 2 years, pride. Behind him, Tanisha spoke quietly. "That's why we created Freedom Beats," she said, "not for perfect steps, for first steps, the kind they take by themselves." Preston's throat tightened. He blinked fast, but the tears were coming anyway. In that moment, his son wasn't a project, wasn't a medical file. He was a boy rediscovering himself. And for the first time in Preston's adult life, he didn't have the next move. A reporter stepped forward. "Mr. Carter, is it true your foundation rejected this program 3 times? Preston glanced at Ethan, then at Tanisha, and then, back at the press. He took a breath. "You know what's hardest for someone in my position?" he said. Voice steady. "Admitting when we're wrong." Gasps. Pens clicked. Cameras readied. Preston continued, louder now. "The Carter Foundation is proud to announce full funding of Freedom Beats for the next 5 years. Along with a new, permanent rehabilitation center based on this very methodology." More gasps. More camera flashes. But Tanisha, she didn't smile yet. Not until Preston added, turning to her, "On one condition, Ms. Evans retains complete creative control. No corporate oversight, no interference." That made her smile. And somewhere in the back of the room, Ethan took one more step. All on his own. 3 months later, bulldozers rolled across an empty lot on the east side of Dallas. On a billboard overlooking the construction site were 5 simple words. "Coming soon. Freedom Beats Center." It wasn't the most glamorous project Preston Carter's foundation had ever funded. No marble walls, no corporate branding, just honest space. Designed by the people who'd use it. Children, parents, therapists, dreamers. And standing right in the middle of it all was Tanisha. Blueprints in hand, safety vest over her t-shirt. She wasn't directing from a podium, she was walking the site with mud on her boots. Taking notes, laughing with kids who dropped by after school. And she wasn't alone. Ethan came with her nearly every week. Sometimes with friends, sometimes with new students. He now wore just a lightweight brace on one leg, and on some days. Not even that, he had developed not just strength, but confidence. Even more surprising? Preston showed up, too. Not in suits or with bodyguards, but with notepads, articles, coffee, and questions. He sat in on planning sessions, studied research on neuroplasticity like a college freshman. He didn't pretend to know everything anymore. One afternoon, as they reviewed design options in the sunlit trailer office, Tanisha glanced up. "I never thought you'd actually show up to board meetings." Preston chuckled, rubbing his temples. "I never thought I'd be learning about brain elasticity at 50. She smiled. "So why are you really doing this?" Preston paused. "Ethan asked to remove his second brace last week." Tanisha nodded. "I know. He told me. His last physical therapist said that wouldn't be possible for 2 more years. She was wrong. Tanisha said, "You fired her, remember?" He looked at her then, really looked. "Why didn't you ever accept my apology?" Tanisha leaned back, arms folded. "Because you never gave one. You changed policies. You funded the program. You shifted your behavior. That's growth. But it's not the same thing as saying, 'I'm sorry.'" Preston nodded slowly. "Fair." 6 months later, the Freedom Beats Center opened its doors with a modest ribbon-cutting ceremony. No red carpet, just dozens of children, parents, teachers, and volunteers who believed in the impossible. Ethan led the first choreographed piece. His movements weren't perfect, but they flowed with purpose. And this time, he wasn't following anyone. He was leading 3 other kids, each with their own challenges. Their own rhythm. From the crowd, Preston watched quietly, hands in his pockets. "He doesn't need you to hold him anymore," Tanisha said, stepping beside him. Preston smiled. "No. But he still needs me to be here." A reporter approached. "Mr. Carter, what's been your biggest lesson from all this?" He looked out at the dance floor, where Ethan was now helping a younger child stay balanced, and answered, "That leadership isn't always about guiding others down the path you believe is right. Sometimes, it's having the courage to follow when someone shows you a better way. Sometimes, the most powerful changes in life begin with something small. A hand held out, a single dance step, a moment when someone chooses courage over comfort." This story wasn't just about a billionaire, a waitress, and a boy with leg braces. It was about all of us. About the walls we build, between people, between classes, between what we think is possible and what actually is. And about the quiet strength it takes to break those walls down. Not with force, but with grace. Tanisha didn't need power to change a life. She just needed clarity, conviction, and heart. Ethan didn't need fixing. He needed space to try. And Preston, he didn't need another expert. He needed to learn how to listen, to truly see his son. Not as a project, but as a person. We live in a world where money talks loud, where status often speaks first, and where people like Tanisha get overlooked every day. But this story reminds us that dignity can't be bought, connection can't be forced, and real leadership starts with humility. Maybe there's a child in your life who just needs to be heard. Maybe there's someone around you carrying more than they show. Or maybe it's you. Maybe you're the one needing someone to believe in your first step. Whatever your story is, remember this: our greatest strength often shows up not when we take control, but when we know when to let go. If this story made you feel something, if it reminded you of someone, or inspired you to think differently, then don't keep it to yourself. Leave a comment below. Tell me what part hit home for you. And if you're still walking with me through these stories, hit that subscribe button. Because out here, we believe that the small moments matter most. And sometimes, it only takes one step to change everything.